Hi, I'm Warren, and I'm an engineer here at Cohesity. And today I'm going to talk about how we can recover Microsoft SQL Server using Cohesity. So in a previous video, we've talked about how you can use the Cohesity application to protect your Microsoft SQL Server databases and servers. In this video, I'll talk about how we can restore those databases and SQL servers. So when you do a Microsoft SQL Server backup, the Cohesity cluster will store two things. First, it's going to store Microsoft SQL Server VM snapshots. And secondly, it's going to store Microsoft SQL Server log backups. And given these backups, you can use the Cohesity application to restore your Microsoft SQL servers and databases. And in this video, I will talk about 3 restore workflows that the Cohesity application currently supports. First, I'm going to talk about restoring an entire Microsoft SQL Server VM. And then I'm going to talk about how you can use Cohesity to clone a Microsoft SQL Server VM. And finally, I'll talk about how you can use Cohesity to restore a Microsoft SQL Server database. So first, let's talk about this first workflow, restoring a Microsoft SQL Server VM. Now suppose, for example, that you've applied a patch to Microsoft SQL Server, but you want to roll it back. Not only the databases, but also the SQL Server binary. What you can do is take one of these VM snapshots and restore the VM. So here's a restored VM here. And inside of this will be a SQL Server. Now remember that these VM snapshots are a VM snapshot, so it contains not only a snapshot of the SQL Server databases, but also of the Microsoft SQL Server binaries. So when you restore the VM, you've also restored the SQL Server binaries. Now the SQL Server is going to be in a crash consistent state. But when you do a Microsoft SQL backup, we not only keep a snapshot of the VM, but inside of the VM snapshot is a app consistent VSS snapshot of the Microsoft SQL Server databases. And so using the Cohesity helper app, we can leverage the Microsoft VSS APIs to take the data in the app consistent snapshot and bring all of the databases to an app consistent state. And then, using the helper app, we can use the VDI API to replay the SQL log backups and replay all of the databases to an arbitrary point in time. And so the result is now you have a restored Microsoft SQL Server VM, the SQL Server binaries are restored, and all of the databases have been restored to an arbitrary point in time. Now let's talk about the next workflow, cloning a SQL Server VM. Suppose that after this you want to apply another SQL Server patch, but before applying it in production, you want to test it out. So you can use this workflow to bring up a clone of your VM that you can quickly bring up, tear down, all without affecting your production environment. How we do this is we can leverage our Snaptree technology, which is our proprietary file system, to create an instantaneous clone copy of the Microsoft SQL Server VM. And now we can spin up this VM instantaneously using Cohesity as the data store so that you don't have to move the data to the primary environment. And so what you get is an instantaneously available copy of your Microsoft SQL Server VM. With our helper app, you can apply the logs just like before, so you can bring it to a specific point in time. And you can do your testing on whatever you need to do, your patches, whatever. And when you're done, you can quickly bring it down, tear it down, clean up, all without affecting your production environment. Finally, let's talk about the last workflow, restoring a SQL database. So let's say you don't want to restore a whole VM or a whole SQL server. You just want to restore a single database. For example, let's say a database has gotten corrupted based on some rogue process or some human error. So what we provide is this workflow where you can restore just that one database. So on the VM where the corrupted database is, what Cohesity can do is mount one of these SQL snapshots on the VM, and so then it will be available as a Cohesity volume. Inside this volume is an app-consistent snapshot of the Microsoft SQL Server Database backups. So again, using our helper app, now we can actually take the app-consistent databases and use VSS to restore that corrupted database from the mounted volume onto the machine, replay logs to any point in time. And with this workflow, now you have restored just that single database and replayed it to an arbitrary point in time. Now, you can actually use this exact workflow not only for recovery scenarios, but also for test dev. So for example, suppose you want to do a schema change on your database, but you, again, want to test it out first before applying it in production. Well, you can apply this exact workflow on any arbitrary machine. So let's say you have a test dev machine in your test environment. You can, again, use Cohesity to mount a SQL Server backup as a volume, use our helper app to copy the database to your test dev machine, replay logs, etc. And now what you have is a copy of your database in a test dev machine where you can do your testing without affecting your production environment. And that is a quick introduction to the restore workflows that Cohesity currently supports for Microsoft SQL Server. Thank you.